Hi, I'm Deanna Springer.
And I'm Dana Casey with another fun Stitch It Sisters sewing project and classic time-saving tips by Nancy Zieman.
First, let's look at the technique we're featuring today. We'll be altering our new McCall's tunic pattern with Nancy's right size fitting techniques, found in Nancy's Confident Sewing Collection book. We'll be using a little Pellon Easy Net interfacing, some pattern making paper, our retractable tape measure, and our 5-in-1 sliding gauge.
Pattern fitting is a sewing basic, made easy with Nancy Zieman's easiest ever pattern fitting techniques.
The first step in fitting our new tunic pattern to your body is taking the right size measurement so we know what size pattern to cut out.
Okay.
All the information we're talking about is in Nancy's Confident Sewing Collection book, including the handy measurement chart. So we're going to take one measurement to determine what size to cut out. And this is a classic time-saving tip from Nancy. This fitting chart tells you what size pattern to cut according to one measurement, and that's the front width measurement or the right size measurement.
Okay.
So right above your bust line, from arm crease to arm crease, we'll find that measurement. And then that will determine what size pattern we cut out. So we took your measurements because we're making this tunic for you, and we've determined that your front width measurement, we're going to cut out a size 12. So we're cutting a size 12 pattern today. We also need to do some other measurements of your body, because on the back of the pattern envelope are many dimensions that are listed on the back for each size that tells what this pattern was made for. So the size 12 wasn't made for your bust line size. Okay. So we fill in the pattern measurements and your body measurements, and we do a little subtracting or addition. Usually we're adding because we're buying the pattern to fit our shoulders and our neckline. We won't be altering the shoulders and the neckline today. We will be altering the easier areas to alter, like the arm, upper arm sleeve, the bust, the waist, the hips.
Okay.
So no altering at all of the neckline, which will be handy, or shoulders. So we've already determined that we need to add some inches to your sleeve, 1.5 inches actually. And I like to start with the sleeve because it shows Nancy's pivot and slide method. We've cut out our size 12 pattern, and we've done a little interfacing to the pattern.
Oh, okay.
So we've added the Easy Knit fusible tricot interfacing to the back of the pattern pieces. It makes them easier to handle and sturdy. So when you make your next tunic, once we fit this to you, you can sew your next tunic.
Very good.
The first step in altering the sleeve pattern is adding that dimension while I get my 5-in-1 sliding gauge. So we know that your sleeve needs 1.5 inches in the upper arm, but we have 2 seams. So we need to divide that measurement in half. So we'll be adding 3/4 inch to each side of your sleeve. So I set the 5-in-1 sliding gauge to 3/4 inch, and I do a little mark. I make a 1 inch, 3/4 inch mark on each side of the sleeve. So we know that's how much we need to increase the sleeve.
Okay.
The next step is to place a pin at the top of the sleeve cap. And this is where Nancy's pivoting comes in. We'll pivot the pattern to meet that 3/4 inch mark, and then we'll trace. We're tracing that original pattern, and we'll stop when we get to the top of the sleeve, and we'll move our pin. And our pin lands at the seam intersection. So our seams are 5/8 inch on this pattern, so I'm 5/8 inch in and 5/8 inch down. And then I'm gonna pivot the pattern back to the original line, and we'll trace all the way down to the bottom of the pattern.
Okay.
So if you slide this down, the pattern is actually increased. We've increased your sleeve, but we've not changed the pattern shape. If you move this pattern shape back up to our new line, it's the same distance. So what that does is add inches as where needed,
Sure.
and we saved the same shape of the sleeve, which means the sleeve will fit into the bodice.
Very good.
Your maximum pivot amount is 1 inch. You can pivot up to 1 inch, and beyond that, you need to then slide for extensions. So if you need an additional inch, we'd make a 1/2 inch mark and slide the pattern over and trace.
Okay.
And that's all covered in the book. Nancy covers that in the book. But whatever extensions you do, when you slide, they have to be made to the bodice as well. But we're just using the pivot method today of changing your sleeve pattern. The same techniques are done to the bodice, only a little bit different. If you had a garment pattern that just had one piece to the pattern front and one to the pattern back, you'd use the same technique.
Okay.
Our new tunic pattern, we'll take this away, thank you. And our new tunic pattern features multiple seams. It's princess style. You'll
Yes.
see on the pattern cover, there are seams on the side fronts. There's also a hidden pocket between the seams.
Ooh.
So when altering the front, this is the center front and the side front, we're going to do the same pivot method. So we'll get our marker and our 5-in-1 sliding gauge out. And from your measurement chart, we know we need to add 3/8 of an inch.
Okay.
And we know that because we took our dimension and divided it by the number of seam allowances. So this we divide by 4. With the sleeve, we divided by 2 seams. This has 4 seams. Side, center, side front, the other side front, and the other side seam.
Okay.
So we'll set our 5-in-1 sliding gauge for 3/8 of an inch. And then we'll mark that 3/8 of an inch mark. And I bet you know what we're going to do next.
Are we going to pivot?
We're going to pivot. We're going to pivot the pattern to meet that mark. And the pivot point is always one intersection
Okay.
ahead. The pivot point is one intersection behind your alteration. So I have the pin here, I slide it to meet your 3/8 inch increase, and I trace again. And I stop after I turn the corner,
Okay.
and I move my pin. You also need an increase in your waist. Your waist needs to be increased by 5/8 of an inch. So we're going to mark 5/8 of an inch on the pattern. On the pattern making paper, that is. And we also know you need a hip increase. And the hip dimension is located at about 9 inches down from the waist.
Okay.
And we know you need, from doing your dimensions, you need 3/8 of an inch increase at the hip line. So I'm marking that at the same time. I do the hip and the waist at the same time because chances are when you pivot that pattern, you'll trace, you'll bring the pin down, and then you'll pivot it back in to meet that increase.
Okay.
So you can do 2 at once and just have that pin follow behind. And then you'll trace all the way down to the original hemline.
Oh, okay.
And with that increase, you see we've added to the bust line and the waistline where needed, but when you move that pattern back to that alteration, it's the same dimension. That means the sleeve will fit in this armhole. We need to do the same alteration to the center front, and that's on our next pattern making paper sample. We'll move this over, and we have our pattern front. Thank you. You'll be so good at this, you'll do the back. We know from doing your right size measurement chart, your body measurements, that we need to add that 3/8 of an inch to the bust.
Okay.
So same setting, let's add to the bust line. And to find the bust line isn't always marked on every pattern piece.
Okay.
So we can bring the side front back in and easily find that. So you would align this like it were going to be sewn together. And what do you know? The bust line is marked on this. The bust line is right at the upper arm where the arm meets the body. So I put a little mark, that's the bust line. So that tells us your increase is needed here because that's where the bust line is.
Okay.
So we'll move that pin one step above and we'll pivot. We'll pivot to that increase and then we'll trace that original arm's eye and that side seam, that side front seam. We'll move that pin to where we made that bust alteration. We'll pivot back and we'll increase your waist. Do you remember what that measurement was?
I don't.
It's 5/8. We need 5/8, and then 9 inches below is the hip, so you'll need 3/8 there. So we'll have it at the bust line to pivot to the waist, and then we'll do some tracing. And then pivot to your hip alteration and connect those lines. And you'll do a better job. You don't have slanty board at home. You'll be working on your
Right.
flat table, but you get the idea. Again, it's the same original designer pattern, just increased in the areas you need.
For a nice fit.
Right, and the same techniques are done to the back. You'll see in this picture that the back has 2 seams as well.
Sure.
There's a center back and a side back, and you'll do the same alterations to that.
So for years and years, when you're making a pattern a size bigger, just so you know it'll fit, you don't need to do that anymore.
Right. The tendency is to buy a pattern to fit your bust line. Well, that usually makes the neckline too big and the shoulders too big. So this way, the seams will fall at the shoulders where they need to be, and the neckline will fit you just right.
Nice.
We've covered the basics of altering our new McCall's tunic pattern with Nancy's right size fitting techniques. Reference Nancy's Confident Sewing Collection book for all of Nancy's pivot and slide pattern fitting methods, including jackets, skirts, and pants. We hope you've enjoyed the Stitch It Sisters project. You'll find this pattern along with Nancy's Confident Sewing Collection book at stitchitsisters.com.
Be sure to tune in again for another Stitch It Sisters sewing adventure.
In the meantime, connect with Stitch It Sisters and friends on our social sites. Stitch It Sisters is made possible by Clover, Pellon, Schmetz Needles, and ShopNZP.com.